Thanks very much, Emmanuel, to be with us today. Just some questions about these points of lowering the break-even point. Cost containment and contribution to lowering break-even point with lower volume is somehow the priority number one of most procurement organizations today. How do you structure your effort, and what kind of competencies do you need for that?
So there are two dimensions to it. This dynamic started a year ago. I remember supply chain disruption, evaporation of demand, most companies facing uncertainty on one side and a dramatic reduction of their revenue from 15 to 50%, depending on the sectors. Clearly, the first reaction at CEO level is to say, I need to reduce my break-even point so that I can navigate through the storm. How does it work then? I would say a Pavlovian reaction on the procurement side, which is to stop orders, reduce volumes, eliminate any unnecessary spend. And I would say a more structural answer that comes in the following months, which is, what do I need to release to keep operations running? And how do I need to redesign my supply chain and my demand so that this cost containment is sustainable? So these type of activities cannot be done alone. For sure, you need a command and control structure in your organization. Stopping the POs, renegotiating the contracts, managing your supply base. But at the same time, you need to very closely interact with your operations and your sales to enable this to be properly tuned to where your client demand is. Last but not least, and super important, at least in the context of pandemic, but I would say in the context of any crisis, you need to take care of your employees and make sure that their basic needs for safety, for continuity of operations are fulfilled, and basically that your cost containment activities do not impair the mandatory mission of taking care of your fellows. So that's the basic structure. How does it articulate then more specifically? At least in our case, there were task force and war rooms on each major stream. One was operation, another one was supporting our clients. The third one was taking care of our employees. The fourth one was addressing each supply chain disruption coming from the crisis. And I would say within 3 to 4 months, it clearly became obvious that we needed to combine this with a mid-long-term view, because when you hit the brakes, when you change the setup of your organization, when the assumptions are no longer the same, when your volumes are reduced, you need to redesign and rethink the way you're going to operate beyond, again, the hit the brakes type of reaction. Underlying and major enabler is very close cross-functional coordination, horizontally, I'd say, and shortening the decision-making process by connecting directly the key functions to the board and with a high frequency, at least bi-weekly, reviews for information and decision. Talking with peers, I think most successful companies have operated that way, and the ones who were the most agile, the most decisive in converting both short-term and mid-term decisions into action have come out of the crisis pretty successfully. But not only this, they're coming out fitter. Okay? To quote Colin Chapman, the founder of Lotus, light is right in such terms.
Thank you very much. Talents and leadership are rotating in multiple companies toward the kind of expertise and drive enabling such priorities. What are the key drivers of this effort? What do you need to pay attention to, Emmanuel?
So there's a couple elements into this. One, people behave differently whether you're in steady state or in crisis. Okay? And actually, you see talents emerge. You see behaviors, winning behaviors emerge with people who basically connect the dots and are stepping up. Okay? And the very nature of leadership evolves. In such case, it's no longer a statutory leadership. It's very much an action-driven leadership. And somehow, what is important is to spot and facilitate the emergence of such leadership. It's not necessarily, I would say, a chaos or a coup d'etat. It's just a different skill set that needs to be expressed, probably less inhibited, more straight to the point, very pragmatic, and able to encompass a broad range of dimensions beyond its own function. And this particularly applies to procurement. Okay? So what does it mean? Clearly, it means very high frequency communication and letting people express their views, but also being able to decide and transform suggestions into action with no delay. Okay? This has a drawback and a point of attention, clearly, which is some people can be left on the side of the road. Okay? Why? Because communication means can become very informal. Decisions go very quickly to the top. Once they're made, it's execution. And as always, you can have a part of your team who feels spectator, okay, or put aside. And if you combine this with, I would say, some personal disruptions, there's a high probability that some people will just feel they're left aside. And I would say the attention of the management is to keep them on board, adjust the expectations to the capabilities of the team, and there is no small contribution there. I would say the biggest trap is to have some fellows who are no longer part of the dynamic, and unfortunately, when things accelerate, it's often the risk. And another dimension is in terms of talent. Be sure that there is a mix of speed and control. Okay. You may see people very at ease in the crisis mode, in the firefighting, and you need to mix your talents so that you combine those with people who are more structured and more process-oriented, just to be sure that you don't confuse speed and precipitation, so to say. That's all the more important that consequences can be great. And obviously, the dimension that clearly explodes in such case, it's all about relationship. Okay? When you have to work with insufficient data, short lead times, goodwill of your organization, your peers, your clients, keeping the relationship at the highest level in terms of quality and in terms of deepness is super important. So basically, it's made for leaders. We're good? Bernard, you're on mute.
Digitalization and demand management are key drivers together with governance, getting procurement much closer to CEOs. And given the decision we know, so meaning the next normal, make or buy decision, drastic volume reduction, how you procurement in Capgemini, have you been working on that?
So digitalization is all about data. And when you need to make quick decisions, it's important to have the most relevant level of information. And this is where basically you can see the difference between organizations who know what is going on. They're able to say, where is their supply, where is their demand, what is missing, what is in excess, what could be eliminated. So it's the data dimension is key. You make good decisions if they are educated decisions, and those decisions are driven by the most available level of data. And that's the digitalization major outcome is you're on top of your data. And when you have this, you enable a second dimension, which is analyze the demand. And when it's all about doing volume and specification effect, the price dimension, I wouldn't say is anecdotal, but you're going to optimize your price within a single digit dimension. When you work on specification on volumes, you're talking about double digit and high double digits. So it's about understanding the demand. If you do it blindly, you can make huge errors. And sometimes doing it with a more mindful approach can enable to, on one side, identify what is totally unnecessary, on the side, understand where you need to invest. And making the meaningful investment in times of crisis, in times of crunch, and understanding what you need to reduce and what you need to increase from a demand standpoint. If it's well driven by adequate data, then you're making the right decisions. And again, this is where big differentiation has taken place between companies. Some kind of hitting the brakes uniformly, sometimes with dramatic effects, and others modulating their efforts, investing on some areas, cutting on others, and readjusting their operating model to make the best of it. Some examples, we've all seen it. When everybody went to work from home, this created a huge disruption in the way a company is allocating its resource. On one side, you need to connect your employees and provide them compute, store, resources together with all the enablers to work remotely. On the other side, it's super important to cut what is totally unnecessary given this new normal way of working. And it's all about balance. The speed at which you execute it is totally different. Addressing real estate or facilities, negotiations or contracts with dimensions of multi-year contracts has nothing to do with supplying IT equipment. And basically, you need to play on one side on what you invest in, on the other side what you reduce, and work at different paces. All this, again, is very much about timing and data. That's the essence of digitalization.
Thank you, Emmanuel. One interesting point is we know that cash is king, but at the same time, due to the low rate we're living in, a lot of companies is forgetting this idea of cash. And we know that one day or another it will be ending. And some have this debt maybe exploding and so on and so forth. Anything we need to be cautious about when we're focusing on this cash, and what do you suggest?
So this one is, we are at a turning point. Most companies were very focused on cash in the last 10 years, up to the point where most efforts were completed. And this being combined with a low interest era made it kind of less critical. As we all know, in periods of crisis, cash is king. And for companies who short-term need to preserve their cash because it's their blood, so to say. And mid-term know that if they need to invest, they're going to need cash in more difficult conditions. It's important to put again a clear focus on it and do it once again in a mindful way, because we all know the society is made of various stakeholders. And among those, there's a lot of small businesses that got completely crushed by the evaporation of cash. And there you need a very differentiated approach. On one side, even if it's not the first reaction, especially for large groups, preserve your cash ratio, improve your cash to cash. On the other side, keep your supply base alive, and make sure that all the incentives, especially governmental incentives, are geared and routed to where it's needed. So it's about being mindful and discerning in the way you optimize your cash. For sure, it's also a matter of survival. What we see today is that the investment capabilities of many companies is reduced across the world. Whilst we all know it's going to be the differentiator when the market accelerates and when we are back for growth. And as a consequence, I focus on cash, and I can make a testimony for my company has been on the top of mind. But again, doing it, taking care of smaller companies and suppliers who are part of our ecosystem, and making sure that it is done with care and in a discerning manner.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Perhaps the last question is about the context. We need to make it more difficult as sustainability, focus on growth, clients, and offset somehow the pushes for traditional cost reduction techniques in a buyer's market. Any final recommendation for your peers, for other colleagues who would be around this conference?
So, with everything we said, we could say this is the golden era of procurement. You know, the kind of decennial crisis that everybody waits for to show what procurement can bring. And we need to not to be lured or take this the wrong way. What is at stake more than ever, and I would say for all companies, first of all, is to restore growth. We're in 2021 March. Some sectors have already resumed growth. If you think about raw material, if you think about freight, for example, some others will have to wait till the end of the year, if not longer. But in everybody's top of mind, growth is a top priority. And never, ever you will see a company sacrificing growth for reducing its break-even point. At best, it's going to be profitable growth. So procurement needs to be mindful about not being excessive in that way, and keeping in mind the other dimensions. I would even say we need to be totally schizophrenic and keep the pressure on the cost structure, because it's a priority, because it's a buyer's market. It's not going to last forever. Because it's necessary to keep the companies alive when turnover is reduced. But keep in mind that what is coming, what has already started on other dimensions, on sustainability, because we know that the way we've been operating is not the way we will be operating, that the sensitivity to climate, to societal dimensions, to social dimensions is more exacerbated than ever, and for valid reasons. Stakeholder capitalism now is the way to go, so to say. Growth, I mentioned it, and obviously clients. Never forget that we are into an interconnected world, and that our clients are also suppliers, and all the traditional techniques to squeeze cost from volume, from demand, from price dimension, taking into account, obviously, for the ones who still have a decent activity, the pricing power that is more on the buyer side needs to be balanced with the other stake of the company. And you know, we were mentioning earlier in this conversation that the communication paths have been shortened. So today, any CPO is in direct relationship with its CEO for the importance of the break-even point and the actions that were triggered for now more than a year. On the other side, we know well that the agenda of the CEO is a much broader one than just the cost, and procurement needs to understand that. Again, combining, I would say, this brutal agenda with the other dimension is probably the best way for procurement to emerge reinforced and somehow enhanced from this crisis, enabling to survive through the storm, but also anticipating that a nicer weather will be back, that growth doesn't come on a field of ruins. You need to fuel the growth, and that sustainability is the way to go to make sure that everything we have done through the crisis is not associated with larger drawbacks that one try to offset. Yeah? And again, client should, as always, remain the focus, not only for the sales, not only for the marketing, but also, and more importantly, for procurement, because you know then why you are buying what you are buying, which is for the client.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for this very optimistic point of view, and thank very much for all your contribution.